Pamela was lying in bed in her softly lit room. It was a typical Tuesday night. The day had been long and stressful at the office, and after a relaxing bath, she curled up under the covers, ready to unwind. The familiar sound of phone notifications buzzed from time to time, but she wasn't in a hurry to check them. It was her usual routine, a little aimless scrolling through Instagram before bed. She skimmed through posts of distant friends, influencers living perfect lives, and ads popping up between pictures. It was a distraction that kept her occupied while her tired mind gradually relaxed. Then a notification popped up at the top of her screen. Message from Fernando. Pamela frowned, curious. The profile was unfamiliar, and she didn't usually respond to strangers. But out of curiosity, she opened the direct message. Hi, beautiful. Your smile is captivating. I'd love to get to know you better. She reread the message, feeling a mix of surprise and intrigue. Who was he? And why had he sent that message? Pamela clicked on Fernando's profile to investigate. The account was public, but there weren't many posts. The profile picture showed four men together in a casual setting, probably friends, but nothing on the profile clearly identified which one was Fernando. There were a few landscape photos of Venezuela and some brief posts about music. Nothing that really helped her figure out more about this man who had just messaged her. Pamela hesitated for a moment, feeling a slight discomfort. It was strange, but at the same time, something about the message stood out. It wasn't vulgar or too forward like many other random approaches she had received online. There was something kind in the greeting, something that made her pause before dismissing it. Without thinking too much, she typed back, "Hi, thanks for the compliment. Who are you?" Pamela sent the message and put her phone aside, not expecting much. After all, she had received this kind of approach many times before. A few minutes passed and her phone buzzed again. Fernando had responded quickly. "I'm from Venezuela. I live in Caracas. I'm a musician and work on local band projects. And you, where are you from?" Pamela smiled as she read it. He seemed polite, which wasn't something she often found in conversations like these. She decided to keep the conversation going. "I live in the United States. I work at an accounting firm. What's it like living in Venezuela? It must be very different from here." She knew the situation in Venezuela was complicated and was curious to learn more about Fernando's life. Slowly, their messages began to flow naturally. The light conversation, which had started with compliments, soon evolved into a deeper exchange of confidences and experiences. Fernando spoke about his passion for music and the struggles he faced in a country with so many political and economic uncertainties. Pamela found herself fascinated by the way he described his life. Despite the problems he faced, Fernando always tried to remain optimistic. He spoke about his dreams with enthusiasm, and that made Pamela feel closer to him, even though they hadn't met in person. Weeks passed, and their messaging became a constant routine. Every day, Pamela eagerly awaited a notification on her phone, anxious to know how Fernando's day had gone. The mystery surrounding him only increased her curiosity and, in a way, her attraction. He seemed to be everything she was looking for: sensitive, attentive, and always interested in learning more about her life as well. Fernando asked about her work, her ambitions, and, eventually, they began to share more intimate stories about their lives. One day, Fernando mentioned his best friend, Daniela. He spoke of her with affection and respect, saying she had always been by his side during tough times. "You'd like her," he said. "She'd love to meet you too." Pamela found the idea interesting, though a bit unusual. She had never met someone online who wanted to introduce her to their friends so soon. But Fernando seemed so genuine that, little by little, Pamela let down her guard. A few days later, Pamela received an unexpected phone call. It was Daniela. She sounded excited and with a warm voice said that Fernando had told her a lot about Pamela. They chatted for a while and Daniela asked questions about Pamela and her relationship with Fernando, making it clear that he was a very important person in her life. "You're lucky," Daniela said. "Fernando is an amazing man. He always speaks so highly of you, and I'm glad he's found someone as special as you." Those words touched Pamela deeply. Knowing that not only Fernando, but also someone close to him valued her, made the relationship feel even more real. Over time, Daniela started calling Pamela more frequently. Their conversations were always relaxed, and Pamela began to feel like she was part of something bigger, as if she was getting to know Fernando more deeply through the friendship he had with Daniela. Even so, something about Fernando still bothered Pamela. In 6 months of intense conversations, he had never shown his face clearly. He said he didn't like taking pictures, and the only image he had on his profile was that old group photo where he never clarified which of the four friends was him. Pamela insisted they do a video call, something she thought was natural for any long-distance relationship, but Fernando always had an excuse ready. "My camera is broken," he would say, "but I'll fix it soon." Pamela tried to ignore the growing discomfort she felt about this. After all, everything else he did and said seemed true, and Daniela validated everything he told her. She clung to the idea that when they finally met, everything would make sense. As the months went by, Fernando began to talk more about his financial problems. He said the crisis in Venezuela was getting worse, and that he was struggling to continue with his music projects. At first, Pamela just listened and tried to offer supportive words. But soon, Fernando started asking for financial help. It wasn't much at first. Money for small expenses, like fixing his car or buying music equipment. Pamela, who was already emotionally involved, didn't see any harm in helping. He promised that once he sorted everything out, he would visit her. He said he was saving money to get his passport and come to the United States. Pamela believed him because, for her, it all seemed like part of a bigger plan, the moment when, finally, they would be together. Weeks turned into months, and Pamela found herself more and more involved with Fernando. Every day followed the same routine. After a tiring day at the office, she rushed home, took a shower, and, still sitting in bed, eagerly grabbed her phone, hoping for a new message from him. The exchange of messages never failed. In the morning, he would wish her a good day, asking how her night had been. In the evening, they would tell each other about their days, and their conversations stretched late into the night. Pamela felt connected to Fernando in a way she had never felt before. Although they had never met, his words made her believe that a future together was possible. He constantly talked about his dreams, how he wanted to take his music to the world, and how the crisis in Venezuela was holding him back. Pamela found herself moved by each new story he told, feeling his desire to overcome his difficulties. She began to feel that he needed her in a way that no one else did. It was around this time that Fernando started asking for small financial favors. First, he said his car had broken down, and he needed to fix it to keep attending his band rehearsals. "It's just temporary," he assured her. "As soon as I sell some old equipment, I'll pay you back." Touched by his situation and believing she was helping the man she loved, Pamela transferred the money without hesitation. Time passed, and the conversations continued with the same intensity. Fernando showed increasing emotional dependence on Pamela, often telling her how she had transformed his life and how he was counting the days until he could finally visit her. Then he began talking about his difficulties in getting a passport. "I don't have the money to pay all the fees right now. Things are really tough here," he said, his voice sad in his audio messages. Once again, Pamela felt the need to help and sent him money to cover the costs. In her mind, this was just another step toward them finally meeting in person. More and more invested, Pamela was blind to the small red flags. Fernando had still not done a video call with her, and that bothered her. At first, he said his phone's camera was broken, but later he started using excuses like lack of time or internet problems. Pamela tried not to dwell on it. She reasoned with herself that the situation in Venezuela was complicated, that his difficulties were real, and that soon they would be together, and all these small barriers would disappear. But as Fernando's excuses continued, doubts slowly began to grow in Pamela's heart. One night, after a long conversation over messages, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about their relationship. How was it possible that, after so many months of talking, he had never found a moment to see her on video? She recalled the only picture on his profile, the image of four men smiling at the camera. Pamela never knew which of those men was Fernando, and every time she asked, he would avoid the question. To calm her uneasiness, Pamela decided to talk to Daniela, Fernando's friend. They had spoken several times before, and Daniela always seemed very kind and concerned about Fernando's well-being. One evening, Pamela called Daniela and decided to openly ask what she thought about the fact that Fernando had never shown his face clearly. Daniela, with her soft and friendly voice, explained that Fernando had some self-esteem issues. He's always been a bit insecure, she said. He doesn't like taking photos and avoids video calls because of it. But I can assure you, Pamela, he's an amazing guy, and he truly loves you. He just needs more time. Daniela's words soothed Pamela's mind a little. It was a plausible explanation. She had met other people who avoided showing their faces out of shame or insecurity. She decided to give him one more chance. After all, Fernando seemed so caring and honest in everything else. Still, the discomfort lingered in her mind. Their relationship seemed perfect in words, but something essential was missing: physical presence. Pamela felt trapped in an emotional roller coaster, swinging between moments of joy when talking to him and moments of doubt because she had never been able to see him. Sometimes she wondered if she was being foolish for ignoring these signs, but then a message from Fernando would come, temporarily dispelling her fears. He always knew what to say to make her feel special. Shortly after, Fernando began to talk about a more serious problem, an injury to his knee that he had suffered during a performance. He said he needed surgery, and without it, he wouldn't be able to continue playing music. He was desperate, and Pamela felt the weight of the situation. His dream was at risk, and once again, she found herself inclined to help him. This time, however, the doubts returned with greater force. Pamela was increasingly investing not just emotionally, but also financially in this relationship. She had transferred considerable sums of money to Fernando, always with the promise that one day they would meet and everything would be resolved. But up until then, he had made no real effort to see her. The excuses, the postponed promises, and the constant need for help were starting to pile up in her mind. Pamela tried to push these thoughts away. She didn't want to believe she might be being deceived. Fernando seemed so sincere, so caring in his messages. How could someone who spoke such sweet words be lying? Even so, the doubts were like a shadow she couldn't fully shake. In an attempt to reaffirm her trust, Pamela decided to ask Fernando one more direct question about the long-awaited meeting. After all, he had promised several times that he would visit the United States, but each time a new excuse arose. She wanted to know, when would they finally meet? Time kept passing, and while the connection between Pamela and Fernando was strong in words, it wasn't moving toward what she wanted most: a real meeting. They had been talking for over a year when once again, Fernando promised he would visit her. It was an autumn evening, and Pamela was sitting on her couch, holding a cup of tea in her hands. The air outside was cool, and the sense of the changing season seemed to reflect the emotional turmoil she carried inside. Fernando's messages had become a comfort in her life, a constant source of hope. She dreamed of the day he would finally arrive at her door, the smile he had so often described finally visible in person. This time, Fernando had given her a deadline. By the next summer, he would be there. He promised that, after all this time, they would finally be together. Pamela clung to that promise. He told her he was sorting out the final details: documents, the knee surgery he had undergone with her financial help, and the passport that was almost ready. "As soon as everything's resolved, I'll buy the ticket," he said in his messages. His words were full of optimism, and Fernando tried to reassure her. "I'll be with you, love. Just a little more patience." But as the months passed, the promises became vaguer. Pamela started noticing a pattern. Every time it seemed like Fernando was about to take the decisive step, a new obstacle appeared. More money he needed to solve a problem, another difficulty in getting his passport, or something unexpected that came up. Pamela tried to be understanding, but her frustration was growing. Each time she felt the long-awaited meeting was close, everything seemed to slip away. On a cold winter night, Pamela decided she couldn't keep living with this uncertainty. She lay in bed, her phone beside her, waiting for another response from Fernando. He had said he needed a little more time and was trying to get everything organized. But something inside her was screaming for a definitive answer. She needed to see him. She needed to know she wasn't living an illusion. Finally, she typed, "Fernando, we need to talk seriously. I can't keep going on like this, not knowing what's really happening. I need to see you. If you can't make a video call with me by the end of this week, I'm going to have to assume something is wrong between us." She felt her heart racing after sending the message. She knew she was putting Fernando against the wall, but for her, there was no other way. The response took longer than usual. Every minute that passed seemed to heighten her anxiety and the feeling that everything was about to collapse. Finally, the phone vibrated. His response was vague and brought nothing new. "Love, I understand that you're frustrated. I want to see you too, but things are really complicated here. I don't know if I'll be able to do it this week. My camera is still broken, and the internet connection is still bad." Those words echoed the same excuses Pamela had heard many times before. But this time, she couldn't take it anymore. She was tired of being strung along. Pamela responded more directly and firmly. "If you really love me, as you say, and want to be with me, then you need to prove you're who you say you are. I can't wait any longer. I need something real right now." The tension was palpable, and the time Fernando took to respond this time felt like an eternity. When he finally replied, his words were even more unsettling for Pamela. "Pamela, don't you trust me? Everything I've done so far has been for us. I promise I'll fix this. I just need more time. I love you and I don't want to lose you over something as small as a video call." For Pamela, that wasn't something small. After so many years of uncertainty, she deserved more than words. She needed proof. The conversation ended inconclusively, but Pamela knew that something had changed inside her. She couldn't keep living on Fernando's promises, and his refusal to do something as simple as a video call had become the symbol of all the doubts that had been growing inside her. Determined to uncover the truth, Pamela started investigating on her own. She went back to Fernando's Instagram profile and began analyzing every detail. Looking through old posts, she realized there was nothing there that truly verified the life he claimed to have. The photos were scarce, and all seemed generic, taken in casual moments with little context. There was nothing that clearly showed who he really was. The only photo in which he appeared was that group shot of 4 men, and Pamela realized he had never said which of the men was actually him. The feeling of being manipulated grew stronger. She also noticed that Daniela, the friend who had always called her during the first months of their relationship, had disappeared completely. Why had Daniela vanished without explanation? They used to talk frequently, and Daniela always seemed eager to strengthen Pamela's relationship with Fernando. Now there was no trace of her. Pamela began to suspect that Fernando and Daniela might actually be the same person. The idea seemed absurd, but with everything that was happening, nothing seemed impossible anymore. She thought about how, from the beginning, Daniela had validated all of Fernando's excuses and always reinforced that he loved her, but had insecurities about his appearance. What if Fernando had invented the entire friendship? What if Daniela had never existed and was just a way to keep Pamela trapped in this virtual relationship? The doubt began to turn into an obsession. Pamela needed answers, and she knew she couldn't get them by waiting for Fernando. He always avoided direct confrontations, always dodged the truth when she demanded clarity. She was determined to uncover what was really going on, even if that meant unearthing a painful truth. It was then that Pamela decided to take a more drastic step. She hired a private investigator. If Fernando couldn't, or wouldn't, show the truth, she would discover it herself. She knew hiring a professional could bring quick and clear answers about who Fernando was and what his real story was. The fear of finding out something terrible was still there, but at the same time, Pamela knew she couldn't continue living with that uncertainty. In the days that followed, Pamela contacted a detective and explained her situation. She gave the investigator all the information she had about Fernando. The few photos, the messages, the details of where he supposedly lived in Venezuela. The detective promised to begin the search immediately, and although Pamela felt anxious, she also felt a sense of temporary relief. Finally, she was taking concrete action to solve the mystery. What Pamela didn't know, however, was that the answers the investigator would bring would completely change the course of her life and her perception of Fernando. She was about to confront a truth that she might not be ready to face. The days following Pamela's decision were filled with a suffocating mixture of anxiety and hope. She knew that hiring a private investigator had been a crucial step, and in some way she felt like she was finally taking control of a situation that had left her adrift for years. The uncertainty about who Fernando really was, and whether everything had been nothing but a cruel lie, was about to be resolved. The investigator, a serious and experienced man, had dealt with cases like this before. He knew that many long-distance relationships, especially those based on virtual interactions, often hid dark secrets. When Pamela handed him the few details she had, his name, their messages, the city where Fernando supposedly lived, and the financial transactions she had made, he promised to dig deep. "I'll give you an answer," the investigator said, his words straightforward but carrying the weight of an impending truth. As she waited for news, Pamela lived in a constant state of nervousness. She continued exchanging messages with Fernando, but with each new conversation, she felt the emotional distance between them growing. His words, which used to make her heart race, now only fueled her suspicions. He still promised that soon they would meet, and that their dream of being together would finally come true. But deep down, Pamela could no longer believe it. A few days later, the investigator finally contacted her. He had discovered something and asked to meet with her in person to reveal his findings. Pamela's heart raced. She was both nervous and eager. For months, she had felt the presence of a shadow of doubt surrounding Fernando, but now she was about to face the truth, once and for all. They met at a discreet cafe, away from curious eyes. The investigator arrived promptly, and as he sat down, noticed the tension written all over Pamela's face. She was visibly restless, her fingers intertwining nervously on the table. Without dragging it out, he began to reveal what he had found. "First, I followed the leads you gave me about Fernando, the city he said he lived in, the photos you showed me, and even the financial details of the transactions you made. What I can tell you immediately is that he's not a scammer in the way you feared." Pamela felt a mixture of relief and confusion upon hearing this. He wasn't a scammer? For months, she had feared that Fernando was a fraud who was taking advantage of her vulnerability, both emotionally and financially. But if he wasn't a scammer, then who was he? The investigator continued. "Fernando really exists, and he does live in Venezuela, just like he told you. I was able to confirm his identity and the truth behind some of the information he shared. However, he has been hiding important things from you." Pamela leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the investigator, waiting for more revelations. He avoided showing his face all these years out of shame about his appearance. It seems he created an image in his mind of how you would perceive him, and he's afraid he won't live up to your expectations. Although he's told the truth about many things, he lied about why he couldn't do video calls. It wasn't that he couldn't. He was simply too ashamed. These words hit Pamela hard. Shame? She was stunned. She had spent years listening to his excuses, his promises that soon he would make a video call, and now she found out he simply had been too ashamed to show himself. She had always insisted that she loved him for who he was, regardless of his appearance. But Fernando had never given her the chance to prove it. The investigator paused, sensing the impact of this information, and then continued. "And as for his friend Daniela, things are more complicated in that area." Pamela felt her stomach tighten at the mention of Daniela. She had always been suspicious of the relationship between the two of them, especially after Daniela suddenly disappeared from their lives. The investigator pressed on, aware that the next revelation would completely change Pamela's understanding of the situation. "Daniela does exist, but she's not who you thought she was. In the beginning, Fernando and Daniela were very close, but after some time, they had a falling out. From what I gathered, there was some disagreement between them that caused them to stop speaking. But there's more. For much of the time that you and Fernando were together, Daniela was the one mediating the conversations. When you spoke with her, it was as if you were speaking to Fernando. She was trying to protect him in some way, helping him maintain the relationship with you, even if it was in a strange manner." Pamela was in shock. Daniela had been involved the whole time? And why had she helped Fernando keep the truth hidden for so long? She felt like the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. Everything seemed even more confusing than before. Fernando had been ashamed of his appearance, and Daniela had acted as a sort of accomplice. But why? The investigator explained that, from what he could tell, Daniela had noticed how much Fernando liked Pamela, but knew he would never have the courage to reveal who he truly was. Perhaps Daniela thought she was helping Fernando by keeping the relationship going, even though it was built on lies. However, after their falling out, she had distanced herself, leaving Fernando to deal with the consequences on his own. Pamela felt a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, confusion, and, in some ways, even relief in knowing that Fernando was real. But her trust in him had been shattered. She sat there in silence, processing everything, while the investigator offered more details about what he had uncovered. But deep down, Pamela already knew what she had to do. As she left the meeting with the investigator, she returned home with a heavy mind. Fernando was real, but the relationship they had built over the years was founded on lies, insecurities, and half-truths. Now she needed to confront Fernando with everything she had learned, and more importantly, she needed to decide if she still wanted to be with him. That night, Pamela sat in front of her phone, her heart heavy. She typed a short and direct message to Fernando. "We need to talk. I know everything." She knew that the next step would be decisive, and for the first time in a long while, she was prepared to face the truth, no matter what the outcome. The days following Pamela's decision were filled with anxious anticipation. She knew that hiring a private investigator had been the right choice, but it didn't make the wait any easier. Every hour felt like a step closer to the truth, and yet the truth itself terrified her. What if Fernando wasn't who she thought he was? What if all the promises, all the words, had been nothing but lies? The investigator, after taking Pamela's case, began working quickly. He assured her he would get answers. Pamela tried to go about her daily life, but her mind was constantly fixated on the unknown. Fernando continued to message her as if nothing had changed, still promising that they would meet soon. But every time her phone buzzed with his name on the screen, it was no longer excitement Pamela felt, but apprehension. She was tired of his words. She needed something real. A few days later, the investigator called. He had uncovered something and asked to meet Pamela in person. Her heart raced as they arranged a time and place to meet. Finally, the moment she had been waiting for and dreading was here. They met at a small cafe, a quiet place where they could talk without interruption. Pamela arrived first, sitting at a table by the window. She watched people pass by, her mind racing with possibilities about what the investigator might tell her. Would it be good news? Bad? She wasn't sure which would be worse. The investigator arrived, a folder in hand. He looked serious as usual and sat down across from her. "I found out quite a bit," he began, his voice steady. "First off, Fernando is real. He's not some fake persona, and he does live in Venezuela, as he said. But as we suspected, there's more to the story." Pamela's heart sank a little. She had been hoping deep down that there would be nothing more to uncover. But she had known better. She braced herself as the investigator continued. "The reason he hasn't shown you his face or done video calls isn't because of technical issues or anything like that. It's because he's ashamed of how he looks. He's been telling you the truth about many things, but his self-esteem issues have kept him from being honest about his appearance. He's been afraid that if you see him, you won't love him the way he wants you to." Pamela listened quietly, a mix of emotions flooding through her. Shame about his appearance? That was the reason for all the lies and the avoidance? She felt conflicted. Part of her was relieved that there wasn't some darker secret, but another part of her felt hurt. Why hadn't he trusted her? She had always told him that looks didn't matter, that she loved him for who he was inside, and yet he had never given her the chance to prove it. The investigator paused for a moment, letting her process the information before continuing. "There's something else, about Daniela." Pamela's stomach churned at the mention of Daniela. She had always suspected something was off about her sudden disappearance. Now she would finally get answers. "Daniela does exist, but things are a bit more complicated than they seem. In the beginning, she and Fernando were very close, as he told you, but after a while they had a falling out. From what I've uncovered, Daniela was actually involved in your relationship for longer than you knew. She was helping Fernando maintain his connection with you by pretending to be him at times." Pamela's eyes widened. "Pretending to be Fernando?" "Yes," the investigator continued. "When you were talking to Daniela, especially in those first few months, there were times when it was actually Fernando responding as her. It seems like they both agreed to this, though the reasons are still unclear. What is clear is that Daniela stopped contacting you when she and Fernando had their falling out." Pamela felt her head spin. Daniela had been part of the deception all along, not just as a friend, but as an active participant in keeping Fernando's lies alive. Why? Why had they done this? The investigator handed her a few documents from his folder, showing proof of his findings. Fernando had indeed told the truth about his life in many ways, but the web of lies surrounding his insecurities and his involvement with Daniela had grown over the years, trapping him in his own deceit. Pamela stared at the papers in silence. Her heart ached with disappointment, confusion, and anger. Fernando was real, but the relationship she had built with him was based on half-truths and manipulation. How could she ever trust him again? How could she ever believe in the future he had promised? As the investigator finished explaining everything, Pamela knew what she had to do. The truth had come to light, and now it was time to confront Fernando. But more than that, she needed to decide what her next step would be. Could she forgive him? Or was this the end? That night, back at home, Pamela sat alone in the quiet of her apartment. Her phone was in her hand, and after a deep breath, she began typing a message to Fernando. "I know everything. We need to talk." She sent the message and sat back, waiting for the confrontation she knew was coming. The lies were over. Now it was time for the truth. Pamela's phone buzzed. Fernando's reply appeared on the screen. "Pamela, I'm sorry. I knew this day would come, and I owe you an explanation. Please, let me explain everything in person." Pamela's heart raced. In person? After all these years, Fernando was finally offering to meet her. She felt a swirl of emotions, anger, sadness, and a sliver of hope. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, but now, with all the lies exposed, she wasn't sure what to expect. She typed her response quickly. "Yes, we need to meet. Let's set a time and place." And just like that, it was decided. They would meet face to face for the first time, and everything would be laid bare. Fernando promised he would do everything possible to come to the United States and meet her, for real this time. No more excuses, no more lies. Pamela agreed to meet him, but deep down, she knew this meeting would either be the end of something or the start of something new. The meeting day approached, and Pamela's nerves were on edge. She had spent so long wondering what it would be like to meet Fernando, imagining different scenarios in her head. Now, the time had come, and she didn't know if she was more afraid of finally seeing him or of what the truth would do to them both. The truth had begun to emerge, but the final confrontation was now inevitable. As she prepared for the meeting, she knew one thing for sure. After this, there would be no going back. This part builds up the tension as the truth starts to unravel, and Pamela learns more about Fernando's insecurities and Daniela's involvement. The anticipation of the final confrontation creates an emotional turning point as Pamela faces the decision of what to do with the relationship. The day of the meeting had arrived, and Pamela could barely contain her nerves. She had spent years imagining what it would be like to finally meet Fernando. Sometimes in her mind, it was a romantic reunion filled with joy and love. Other times, it was filled with doubt, fear, and the weight of unresolved questions. But now, standing on the brink of reality, she wasn't sure what to expect anymore. They had arranged to meet at a park in the center of town, a public place where Pamela felt she could maintain control of the situation. She had been clear. No more lies, no more excuses. This meeting would be a reckoning, the moment when all the half-truths and manipulation would be confronted. Whether it would end in reconciliation or goodbye, Pamela didn't know. She arrived at the park early, her heart pounding with anticipation. Sitting on a bench, she glanced around at the people passing by, her mind racing. She kept glancing at her phone, checking the time, but deep down, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was about to happen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she saw someone approaching. It was Fernando. Pamela's breath caught in her throat. He walked slowly, hesitantly, his head lowered slightly, as if unsure whether to approach her. The man she had spent years talking to was now only a few feet away. He was real, no longer a figment of her imagination, no longer just a voice in her phone. Fernando stopped a few steps in front of her, looking at her with a mixture of fear and regret. He wasn't what Pamela had imagined in her mind all those years. He wasn't tall or conventionally handsome like she had once hoped. His appearance was simple, unremarkable, but the weight of the lies between them made the moment much more complex than a mere physical impression. Pamela, he said softly, his voice trembling. She stared at him for a moment, her emotions swirling. Relief, sadness, disappointment. This was the man she had poured her heart into, the man who had both enchanted her and kept her trapped in an emotional maze. Now he was finally standing in front of her, and everything felt so different. "So it's really you," she said, her voice steady but tinged with hurt. "All this time, Fernando, why? Why did you lie to me for so long?" He took a deep breath as if gathering the courage to respond. "I'm sorry, Pamela. I'm so sorry for everything. I was terrified. Terrified that if you saw who I really am, you wouldn't want me. I didn't know how to escape the lies once they started. It just kept getting worse." Pamela's eyes narrowed, the pain of his words sinking in. "You should have trusted me. You never even gave me the chance to prove that I could love you for who you are. Instead, you hid behind excuses and lies. All I ever wanted was to see you, to know that this was real." Fernando lowered his gaze, ashamed. "I know. I know I ruined everything. I thought if I kept stalling, maybe I could keep you in my life a little longer. I didn't want to lose you." Pamela stood up, the frustration and heartache boiling over. "But you did lose me, Fernando. With every lie, every broken promise, you pushed me further away. You built this relationship on half-truths, and now I don't even know if any of it was real." She could see the regret in his eyes, but it was too late. He had shattered her trust in ways that couldn't be easily repaired. He had taken advantage of her emotions, her patience, and her kindness, and she wasn't sure she could ever forgive that. "I never meant to hurt you," Fernando said quietly. "I love you, Pamela. I really do. I I didn't know how to be honest with you. I was afraid." Pamela's heart clenched at his words. She had waited so long to hear those words in person, but now they felt hollow. Could love survive this kind of betrayal? Could she ever look at him the same way, knowing everything she knew now? "I loved you too, Fernando," she said softly, her voice breaking. "But this isn't enough. Love isn't just words. It's trust, honesty, and showing up, none of which you ever gave me." He nodded, his face etched with sorrow. "I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." For a moment, they both stood in silence, the weight of the years between them crashing down like a tidal wave. Pamela wanted to cry, to scream, to let out all the pain she had kept bottled up for so long, but instead she just looked at him, feeling more tired than angry. "What do you want from me, Fernando?" she asked finally, her voice almost a whisper. "I just wanted a chance to explain," he said, "and to tell you that, despite everything, my feelings for you were real. I didn't fake any of that." Pamela closed her eyes, trying to process his words. Could his feelings be real, despite all the lies? Did it even matter at this point? She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze one last time. "I believe you," she said quietly, "but it's not enough." Fernando's face fell. He knew what was coming. "I can't do this anymore, Fernando," she continued, her voice steady now. "I can't keep living in this uncertainty, this web of lies. I deserve more than this." He nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand. I'm so sorry, Pamela. I truly am." For the first time in what felt like forever, Pamela felt a sense of closure. The weight she had been carrying for years began to lift, little by little. It hurt, but she knew this was the right decision. She took a step back, putting some distance between them. "Goodbye, Fernando," she said, her voice soft but final. Without another word, Pamela turned and began to walk away. Each step felt heavy, but with each one, she felt lighter, more at peace. She had confronted the truth, and while it wasn't the ending she had once hoped for, it was an ending nonetheless. She knew now that she could move on, free from the lies and manipulation that had held her back for so long. As she walked away, the park around her seemed brighter, the air a little clearer. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt ready to face it on her own terms. And so Pamela's journey comes to an end, one of love, betrayal, and ultimately, self-discovery. But her story raises questions we all must face. How much are we willing to sacrifice for love? And when is it time to walk away? If you've ever been caught in a relationship filled with uncertainty or had to make the tough choice to put yourself first, share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and emotional awakening, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Until next time, remember, sometimes walking away is the first step towards finding true happiness.